General Electric was a company that I was so proud to be part of, and I was so proud to be part of it because we led in industries that really matter: healthcare, aerospace, power. But when you play across many industries, sometimes too many goals can be no goals at all. GE Vernova is a 2-month startup at this point. We spun out and separated from General Electric, and today our equipment powers about 25% of the world's electricity, so real scale. I think the good news in the world is we're kind of past the point that most leaders are denying the dynamic of climate change. This is real and time is not in our favor. We can set many long-term goals and they're important, but we need to act now.
Welcome to the Influence Stage at Climatech 2024. Please give a round of applause and welcome our next session to the stage.
I'm Bob Safian, and I'm here at Climatech 2024 in Boston with Scott Strazik, the CEO of GE Vernova.
Bob?
Scott, it's great to be here with you.
I'm thrilled to be here. This is a cool setting. It's a good Tuesday in Boston. Thanks for doing this with us, Bob.
Yeah, this is great. So GE has been around a long time. GE Vernova is brand new.
Yes.
There are a lot of new choices that you had to make in running this global organization. And one of those was where to base the company.
Yes.
And you could have put the headquarters anywhere, and you chose right nearby here in Cambridge. So how and why did you decide to bring GE Vernova here?
You bet, Bob. And I think just a little context, as you said, for everyone. I mean, GE Vernova is a 2-month startup at this point. We spun out and separated from General Electric in the 133-year-old history of GE on April 2nd. And today, our equipment powers about 25% of the world's electricity, so real scale. And why we chose Cambridge is for a lot of the same reasons that this room is together in this group. This is a epicenter of innovation. When you think about the US and where there's real climate enthusiasm, especially, let's say, north of DC, Boston quickly became the spot. You think about the 150,000 plus college kids here. And for me and what I want GE Vernova to become, we talk to a lot of young people. And we talk to a lot of young people that talk about climate change being one of the biggest things for their generation. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to go where the kids were also, because the reality is we want them coming into this industry and working with us, because the challenges we have ahead with authentically electrifying the world while simultaneously decarbonizing it is going to need a whole nother generation of leadership.
Yeah. So this name, Vernova.
Yep.
This is a made up name, right? You guys created this. Sounds like green.
Yes,
now,
you got it.
Not all energy companies have always been enthusiastically green. And some people might say, oh, is that greenwashing to put green in your name? How did you make this choice?
I mean, the first question we had to decide is, did we want to retain the GE in our branding? Because the reality is the world is changing, and we needed to change with it. And that is where Vernova came from. Verde, green, Nova, new green innovation, okay?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we're running away from our past and our history. We're proud of that. But with the objectives and the challenges that the world has ahead, there's going to have to be a different way to work and a different way to operate. And that was implicit and explicit to all of our stakeholders with Vernova, that this is a new company, this is a new day, and we're going to operate in a different way.
Not all energy company leaders have always agreed that human actions impact climate change. How does GE Vernova think about it?
The time is now. At the end of the day, I think the good news in the world is we're kind of past the point that the most leaders in the world are denying the dynamic of climate change. This is real and time is not in our favor. We can set many long-term goals and they're important, but we need to act now. We need to use the technology that exists today to drive action and move the needle now. Because if our goals are too far into the future and too grandiose, it may not matter if we get to those if we don't make progress today.
And the technology exists today to do what you can do or want to do today, or there's some things that you're still hoping for?
It's a combination of both, but what I would tell you is the technology exists to a larger extent than the world appreciates, and the challenge is how do we industrialize that technology at scale? The reality is we've built up an electric power system over a century that we need to transform in 20 years max. We need to rebuild and build this infrastructure faster in a more efficient way than the world has done before. And that industrial challenge is really at the heart of what we talk about as an investment supercycle that's required to both continue to serve the increasing demand for electricity that we see from many macro drivers, but simultaneously, every year we need that system to become cleaner.
I mean, the power grid in the US, the energy future, is the idea that the power moves both ways in the grid. It's much more technological. There's AI as part of it. But the current grid is aging and does not have any of that capability. So you're sort of balancing between fixing and maintaining what's here and building something new from scratch at the same time? Or like, can you build on top of what's there?
It's a combination of all the above, but what I tell you is our electrification business, as we call it, is our fastest growing business. Now, a lot of times people think about that in the context of modernizing and expanding the physical grid today, whether that be connecting new wind and solar farms to where it's needed or modernizing aged transformers or switch gears, and that's all true. But at the end of the day, if the reality is the system has been built under the assumption that it is powered from coal plants that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in one direction flow to homes. And Bob, exactly as you said, we're living in a world now where, to start, the power generation is more variable, more complicated, that requires a different system. But then the electrons are flowing in both directions. And that creates its own complexity, whether it be the F-150s or the solar panels. And then with it, one of our biggest investments is in grid software, because we can make all of the physical improvements that we want. If we don't fix the brains of the grid, this is going to be for naught.
AI would be a big part of the energy grid of the future. There are AI data centers now that use a tremendous amount of energy. And they need more sustainable and predictable energy sources. One of them that's being discussed is nuclear power, specifically, if I have this right, small modular reactors, SMR. So how close is that technology? How safe is it? How expensive is it?
AI is critical to where the macro theme in this sector is going. In the US, there hasn't been much demand growth for electricity in the last 20 years. AI and the data centers are one of multiple drivers that's changing that dynamic, whether it be data centers, whether it be chip factories in the US, whether it be electrifying industries that are powered by fossil fuels historically. Demand is up. One of the ways to solve that demand growth is definitely small modular reactors. And for us, we'll commission the first 300 megawatt small modular reactor in Canada and Ontario in 2029. So it's real. I mean, we're finishing up the engineering this year. We'll be in construction of the first plant next year. Now, those early projects are expensive. But the point behind small modular reactor is that by doing the exact same small 300 megawatt block of power many times, will come down the cost curve in a different way than nuclear has experienced in the past. Because the reality is there are very few nuclear plants in the world that have been on time and on budget. That's because everyone's been uniquely different. By modularizing to a smaller solution, we have a high degree of confidence that we'll be able to come down that cost curve. So as we get into the middle of the next decade, this starts to become a very, very material part of the electric power system.
They're almost like a prefab home. Like you have the pieces, and once you know how to put them together, you can put them together more quickly, more easily, more efficiently in new places.
Lego blocks. You know, it's not one piece by any means, and this still is a multi-year construction process. And like many parts of the system, we need to work through permitting and things like that. But the Lego blocks come together in a much more efficient fashion.
But I'm not going to have a small modular reactor in my backyard instead of solar panels.
Well, no. 300 megawatts is still a lot. This is more larger scale industrial power still. But at the same time, the physical space is less than the size of an American football field.
Let me ask you about wind power. It's a
Yes.
core offering for GE Vernova. Massachusetts has been a pioneer in the U.S. in
Yes.
offshore wind.
For sure.
Recently, other states have seen their offshore projects sort of fall through. Where are you on offshore wind? Like, is it an answer? Is it kind of an anomaly? Because it's complicated.
It is complicated, but it's important. The reality is the last, let's say, 2 years have been full of scary headlines for offshore wind, and the industry economics have definitely been challenged. All that said, when we look ahead over the next 5 to 10 years, the world needs offshore wind. Places like the Northeast need offshore wind to both electrify and decarbonize their systems. So we believe offshore wind is critical for the future. Now, it is going to be more expensive than onshore wind. It's going to be more expensive than solar. But the way we need to start to think about offshore wind is the correct comparisons, which is really, is it more expensive than a new nuclear plant? Is it more expensive than putting carbon capture on a gas plant? Where you have good wind conditions, where you have shallow enough water that you can navigate to make this work, there's no question in our mind, offshore wind's a more economical answer. It doesn't mean it's comparable to onshore wind or solar.
It's interesting as you talk about it, it sounds like the right renewable solution for each location, for each need, has to be assessed based on both the conditions and the economics that are available in that situation.
I think that goes back to driving the efficiency that the world needs. Where you have good wind and solar conditions, you're going to need to take advantage of that resource every day. In the same token, we're investing a lot of money into carbon capture where that makes sense. You got to use the resources you have. And the challenge we have to transform this electric power system, it's going to require an all the above mindset. And that's one of the things I find to be a real privilege for us in Vernova is we don't walk in the room wearing a wind hat or a gas hat or a nuclear hat because we play across these technologies. We want to apply the most efficient economic technologies to what the location has.
You mentioned carbon capture. I did an episode of Rapid Response about direct air carbon capture, taking carbon out of the air anywhere on the planet and putting it in the ground. What are your thoughts about that? What are the economics and what kind of impact can that have?
So if we first went to New Bedford and saw our offshore wind, marshalling harbor, the next place we'd go is Niskayuna, New York at our research center. Because at our research center today, we have a direct air capture facility that's running, pulling carbon out of the air every day of the week. It's hard to pull carbon out of the air because when you think about it, the carbon intensity of the air is very low. And one of the things we really debated inside Vernova is, do we want to develop a carbon capture technology that goes after the hardest carbon to catch, direct air capture, or do we want to develop a carbon capture technology that goes after the highest carbon intensity opportunities like industrial applications? And the reality is we ended up leaning more towards the direct air capture. Now, one of the reasons why we did that is candidly we had a benefit where for a period of time, we had a partnership with the US government on what was an air-to-water program. Because one of the largest fatalities for the US military is getting resources to remote troops. So we developed an air-to-water technology to pull the water right out of the air for troops in remote locations. And we're using that exact same technology now to pull the carbon out of the air. Now, it is expensive. And it's early. But then it comes back to the earlier point, which is there's a lot of technology that works, but what the world needs is an ability to industrialize it at scale. That's our next step. That's something we'll be really starting to advance in 2025, because this is not about whether we've got exciting technologies. It's about whether we find the breakthroughs at times to be able to build thousands and millions of these things quickly that can move the needle this year.
You have ambition to get a lot done. GE, which you spun out from, was
Yes.
around a long time, had a certain way of operating. I know that you want to take advantage of some of the good things about that, and at the same time upgrade some of the limitations, make things faster and more like a startup. So how do you do that in an organization that's been around a long time and is as big as GE Vernova?
I think great companies find a way to problem solve and deliver in the near term while finding the oxygen or the space to work on the long-term breakthroughs. And at the heart of the company we're trying to create is I often talk about a we culture that protects for the organization to be accountable to tomorrow, but that can feel protected to take big swings on the stuff that can really change the world. My experience with GE is that we never lacked ambition, but at times culturally, we may not have found the right balance between protecting to deliver on the near term while nurturing the long-term breakthroughs. And that's a lot of what we're working our way through right now with Vernova. And the good news is, as a 2-month-old startup, but one that has a history, that has a big install base, that does a lot of stuff today, our ability to kind of dual task those themes is more possible because we've already got a big install base. We already do a lot of things, but I think we have a good read for what it's going to take to really have step change improvements. And we talk about those breakthroughs in a very different way than we talk about hitting the next financial quarter or meeting the next operational milestone. I'm hopeful on this journey we continue to nurture that culture, and with it, our teams continue to get that much more ambitious to go for the big swings.
Do you personally have to operate differently as a CEO than GE CEOs of the past?
I think certainly I'm 2 months into a completely new and different experience as a public company CEO, so my role certainly has changed. The reality is when you're inside a big company relative to what I'm doing today, I have the privilege now of having more capacity to navigate the outside world, and we have less internal dynamics to juggle, or at least I do. So that's empowering. But it also is a responsibility, because the reality is General Electric was a company that I was so proud to be part of. And I was so proud to be part of it because we led in industries that really matter: healthcare, aerospace, power. But when you play across many industries, sometimes too many goals can be no goals at all. For us now as a purpose-built company to lead in the energy transition, the expectations and the responsibilities of us are to take positions and to lead in this industry forward, and that's exactly what we intend to do.
Yeah. So when it comes to Climatech,
Yeah.
What's the hardest challenge? Is it developing the tech itself? Is it the costs? Or is it like the human elements, inertia, getting people and organizations that you work with to embrace the changes that are really required?
There's a lot for us to juggle. The reality, like many themes in the world, many things even with energy are politicized in different ways. What we're trying to do inside Vernova, and this is a real shift from where we were inside GE, is we want to be viewed as the partner of choice. For companies that have good ideas, good products, leverage our customer reach. Let us help you in different ways reach the largest utilities in the world. And after that effective iteration with our customer base, use one of our greatest assets, which is we have an incredible industrial footprint. And in some cases, that industrial footprint, we can evolve how we use that factory space, how we use the cranes. Factories near railroads are hard to come by right now that already have the electrical connection. So I aspire for Vernova to play a bigger, more strategic role with the ecosystem. I think we'll make a lot of progress this decade, and Vernova will humbly try to do their part.
I want to ask you one last thing. The human factor.
Yeah.
I feel like climate change is so big and the changes are slow.
Yeah.
Right? But you need to have progress and keep everyone's energy up. How do you think about balancing that part to keep people moving forward and patient at the same time. Like you have to be urgent and patient.
Although some of our solutions are long cycle, and that is true, the reality is the frequency and the intensity of what we're seeing in the world every day because of climate change is becoming more rapid. And those two dynamics motivate us more and more every day to move faster. It's really hard to live in the world today and not feel like the intensity and importance of our work isn't getting more and more important every day based on what we all see with extremes of weather. So I think it's quite easy every day to get motivated in a long cycle business to do this work because it's work worth doing.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for doing this.
Bob,
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.